It's You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions. And this week, my first question comes from Chrisiosity, who says, "Hi, Steve. Since you talked about the new Christian exploitation, term coined by the cinema snob, I think, movies that have been coming out of late, it has gotten me to thinking, why do Christians make such awful books, movies, and music lately when historically they have inspired such great works? Are there any Christian films that you like from a film perspective? I enjoy William Peter Blatty's books and some of the film adaptations, like The Exorcist or The Ninth Configuration, imperfect but interesting. But those were decades ago. What gives?" It's a good question. How did we come in just really a few centuries from Bach and Handel to Michael W. Smith and the Newsboys? Like, what happened to sacred music, to Christian music? And not only that, but also Christian literature and cinema just in general. I mean, I think a lot of it is that modern Christian art, modern Christian popular art, movies, books, music, etc., is built around a sales pitch. It's written, it's produced with the intent from the very beginning that it is being made in pursuit of fulfilling the Great Commission. It's a witnessing tool. And I think that really kills it. There are some Christian movies that I do like. There are some relatively recent Christian movies that I do like. I don't think any of them fall into the category of, as you said, the Christian exploitation movies or the contemporary Christian movies like the ones I talked about in my 5 Things video a couple of weeks ago. I think Martin Scorsese's Last Temptation of Christ is a brilliant film. As I said in the most recent episode of the Late Seating podcast, the film The Gospel According to St. Matthew, directed by Pier Paolo Pasolini, is, again, a brilliant movie. There have been a couple of other interesting Christian movies in the last 15, 20 years. For instance, Robert Duvall's film The Apostle was really interesting. They all have, I think, in common the trait of not being primarily focused on selling Christianity to the audience. The Jesus films I mentioned, and also The Apostle, were focused on exploring their main characters in an honest, artistic, creative way. And that was the number one goal of those films. Martin Scorsese's Last Temptation movie is not a sales pitch for Christianity. The point of that movie is not to show you how glorious and wonderful Jesus is, and now you should all give your hearts and your souls to him. You should everybody say the sinner's prayer. That wasn't the point of that movie. The point was to give us a version of Jesus that Scorsese and also the author of the original book, Nikos Kazantzakis, found interesting, found moving, found compelling, and to show us this Jesus and to explore this character and what his life is like and what his feelings are and what's important to him and what makes him tick and what choices he makes and why and what they mean. It was art. It was a narrative. It was creative. It was not, hey, everybody, look how great Jesus is. Now let's all go to church. That, I think, is the key. That's what kills it. And the Christian art made in the last 50, 60 years or so that avoids that trap and focuses more on the story and more on the characters and more on the artistic, creative side, I think succeeds wonderfully in many cases. The more recent stuff that's coming out of the contemporary Christian scene, not so much. Malevolent Divinity, considering the Brexit now seems to have actually succeeded somehow, and its primary motivation seems to be moronic, baseless xenophobia, do you think that perhaps Donald Trump's stupidity is affecting the rest of the world? Do you think he managed to sway additional idiots to make such a ridiculous decision? I don't think that's it. I think it's more that people like Trump are taking advantage of ill will toward immigrants, toward people who are perceived as being others, that is boiling up as a result of many different factors. Unfortunately, you will rarely lose in politics if you can give people someone to be afraid of, someone to blame their problems on, and then you pitch your campaign as vote for me or vote for us, and we're going to fix it because we're against those people. We're against those immigrants. We're against those Muslims. In the 60s, it was we're against those blacks here in the United States. It's still like that, honestly, in the Republican Party, but they're not so explicit about it for the most part, Donald Trump notwithstanding. For the most part, they're not as explicit about it, but there's still a lot of anti-black, pro-white sentiment underneath a lot of the Republican campaigns. That's the message. We're going to take care of those people who are trying to change things, those people who are trying to take your country away from you. We're going to vote for us. We're going to take care of it. We're going to fix it. It's a really vile tactic, but it's not something that the Leave campaign or the Trump campaign invented. And unfortunately, it's something that is often dismayingly effective. Captain Andy, hey Steve, I've always felt a certain sense of smugness when looking at America and thinking how glad I am that no matter what happens, at least my country isn't anything like as bad as America when it comes to politics. However, following the disastrous results of the EU referendum and the political mess that we're currently in, it's slowly dawning on me that I really don't have that much to feel smug about. Do you have any advice on how to cope as a progressively minded person in a country caught in the grip of paranoid, reactionary, and generally ill-informed conservatism? Setbacks tend to be temporary, but progress tends to endure. I wish I could give you better advice than that. I wish I could have something a little more meaningful to say or a little more substantial to offer, but that's the best that I can do. As someone who lives in a country that is very much like you describe, now you're starting to fear your country is being. That's the best I can do. When there's a setback, like here in the United States, a couple years ago, the Supreme Court striking down a very important portion of our Voting Rights Act that threatened the enfranchisement of many poor people and many people of color in the United States. That was a huge setback. That was a really, really discouraging thing. But I get through it by telling myself that is a temporary setback. That is something that can be corrected in a few years, hopefully. And once it is corrected, it will last. Or at least it will last for much longer than the setback lasted. Progress happens in fits and starts. There is progress, and then there is backtracking, there is backsliding, but there's always progress again. You know, you take 3 steps forward, you take a step back. You take 3 more steps forward, you take 2 more steps back. But over the long haul, you are making progress. That is the best I can tell you. I can also tell you that I completely empathize and relate to your disillusionment. The success of Donald Trump's candidacy has been something that I have had to come to grips with, because even though I have known for a while that my country is kind of fucked up and has a lot more of a racism problem and a sexism problem than most of us care to admit and are willing to face, the success of Donald Trump's campaign and the success of it not only despite but because of the tone and the aggressive, caustic, openly bigoted tone of the Trump campaign, the fact that that is what appeals to so many people about it, that has been dismaying, that has been discouraging. And it's been eye-opening to me to watch that and to listen to my friends who happen to be black or LGBT or women, and listen to them say, you know, it's not a surprise to us. It might be a surprise to you, cis, hetero, white guy, but it's not a surprise to us. We've known that this is the country all along. We've known that this is the boat that we're all in. You just might not see it, or you might not want to see it, but it's been like this for a while. Welcome to the party, you know. That has been educational, that has been instructive. It hasn't exactly been encouraging, but it's been helpful to be made more aware of that. And maybe that's a little bit of what you're going through as well. It's coming to terms with waking up to the fact that things socially are not quite as far along as you thought they were or hoped they were. And that's, you know, discouraging, but it's also good because now you have a clearer picture of what things are and what needs to be done. Patrick Dodds, Steve, what present-day movie genre, in your opinion, needs a complete overhaul and why? Also, how would you overhaul it? Here's an example. Personally, I'd say modern mainstream comedies. They're witless, dumbed down, and homogenous. How would I change it? Get writers with a broad knowledge of the principles of comedy. If I had to pick a genre that needed an overhaul, I would say maybe crime drama or police procedurals, because I love a good police procedural. I love a good detective movie, you know? But I don't think I've seen a really, really fucking good detective movie, like a cops and robbers sort of crime movie. I haven't seen a really good one since Narc. And that's been a while ago now. That's been like 15 years ago or so, I think. Narc was a great movie starring Ray Liotta and Jason Patric. Just a really, really good movie. Reminded me a lot of The French Connection. I would do what I think is a good suggestion anytime a genre needs to be rejuvenated, and that is to just go back to basics. Everyday, ordinary people being able to make a difference in the cause of justice in a very palpable way. That's what we like about cop shows. That's what we like about crime dramas, is the perception, perhaps it's a fantasy, but it's an appealing fantasy, that you can fight crime and you can mete out justice. And justice is this great big cosmic concept that we can never truly get a handle on in our lives, but through this microcosm of a crime story, we can mete out justice. This heroic detective can catch this bad guy or right this injustice. This one thing can be made right. This wrong thing can be made right. This mystery can be solved. This death can be avenged. That is the core, to me, of what makes those sorts of stories really compelling. And I would try as much as possible to reinvent the genre, to deconstruct it and build it back up as something a little tighter, a little leaner, a little more appealing, by focusing on that appeal of the everyday, ordinary person who, through his or her job as a policeman, as a detective, as a whatever, can see that justice is done in this one particular circumstance. That to me is the heart of the appeal of those stories, and that's what I would try to drive towards if I were to undertake such a renovation project on that genre. Hipster shining armor. Steve, one of the things I've always found deeply irritating about the way some people, even some well-meaning people, talk about Islamic extremism is that they fail to recognize that groups like Daesh or Al-Qaeda are, at their core, part of a reactionary movement. This isn't just a case of Islam being unable to modernize or whatever, and if that isn't a loaded term for you, I don't know what is. Sunni terrorist organizations are primarily a reaction to both Western imperialism and to the governments of Middle Eastern nation states, which they perceive as being corrupt, oligarchic, unresponsive to the people, and insufficiently Muslim. So with all this in mind, do you think it's fair to say that Islamic extremism in the Muslim world is the flip side of the coin to the rise of xenophobic ethnic nationalism in Europe and the US? Obviously, I'm not saying they're the exact same, but I feel like they're a lot more similar than most Westerners would care to admit. Well, I think you're right on the money. One of the things that annoys me about the way people talk about groups like Daesh or Al-Qaeda or just the phenomenon of Islamic terrorism or Islamic extremism in general is when people act as though it is 100% caused by the religion of Islam, as though Islam were A, this monolithic thing that is just one set of beliefs or one interpretation of a religious text, and B, that it exists in a vacuum, that people practicing Islam are motivated only by their religious beliefs and they are not affected by anything else in their culture or in their lives. I think that is ridiculous. I think if we really want to understand groups like Daesh, groups like Al-Qaeda, groups like all of those gangs of terrorists and extremists and militant Islamists in the Middle East, you have to understand that in addition to being motivated by their version of Islam, they're also motivated politically. They are political organizations. Yes, they have an Islamic character. Yes, they have Islamic rhetoric. Yes, I believe they do sincerely have Islamic beliefs. They're not just cynically exploiting Islam for their political gains. I do believe they are sincere in their belief. At least most of them are. Many of them are. But they're politically motivated. Whether they say that or not, whether they themselves even realize it or not. They are politically motivated, and you cannot ignore the politics, which involves, yes, Western influence, Western interference, Western imperialism at work in the Middle East, and also the actual governments that are in place in the Middle East. Now, one of the interesting things I found is when I listen to Muslims talk about Islamic extremism, talk about groups like Daesh and Al-Qaeda, they talk about them as being secular. They don't view them being too religious as the problem. They view them not being religious enough as the problem. And whether that's right or wrong, whether that's a reasonable position or not, isn't my point. My point is that within the Muslim world, these organizations are understood by many people to be something other than Muslim, or something other than exclusively Muslim. They're understood in political terms. And I think we don't make an attempt to understand them in those terms nearly as often as we should. We default to, well, it's just something about Islam that makes them this way, which is so simplistic and leads to people saying really foolish things like Islam is incompatible with the West, when obviously that's not true. Yeah, so I think you're right. It's a much more complex issue, and yeah, it is. It does have a lot in common with the strains of nationalism that are popular among certain folks in the West, and I think it's the fact that there's a lot of political stuff that is wrapped up in these radical, what are called radical Islamic or Islamic terrorist groups. They're motivated just as much, if not more so, by political means, by political goals, by political motivations as by religious ones. Dr. Babylon, Steve, you spend a lot of time making an Atheist Reads videos and other videos to help atheists respond to Christian apologetics and defend their beliefs. But have you ever helped a Christian, or a follower of any other religion for that matter, defend his or her beliefs when confronted by an atheist? This is something I did a few times back in high school, but in hindsight, I realized most of my arguments weren't especially strong. So far, I haven't had to do the same thing in college, but I want to be prepared. Even if this has never happened to you, I'd like to know what kind of arguments you would use if ever forced to play devil's advocate, so to speak. Well, no, I have never done that. I've never helped a religious believer defend their beliefs against an atheist. There are bad arguments that atheists use against Christians and against Christian beliefs. The appeal to low intelligence, I think, is something we really definitely need to stop doing. When atheists assume that a deeply religious person must be so devout because they're ignorant or because they lack intelligence, that's a really, really patronizing, insulting, condescending tactic, and I don't think we should ever do that. The assumption that you understand a person's experience better than they do. I am completely on board with atheists saying there's no such thing as a genuine religious experience, in the sense that nothing supernatural happens. You know, it's not actually God speaking to you. It's not actually a miraculous thing that you are experiencing. But that doesn't change the fact that people do have such experiences. They may understand them completely differently. A person who is a devout religious person may have an experience that they interpret as being in touch with God or being supernatural or miraculous in some way. The fact that I don't think that's what happened doesn't change the fact that they did have that experience. And I think it's important to respect that, not to affirm its miraculous or divine nature. You don't have to say, well, you had the experience, so I don't know, maybe there is a God, or maybe you were touched by something miraculous. I don't think you need to affirm that part of it, but you need to accept that they had the experience, and that from where they stood, through their eyes, they understood it as a religious experience. I think that's very important, both as an act of respect for another person, and also so that we as non-believers can understand what religious believers are experiencing and maybe why they believe what they believe in the first place. But I mean, as for what arguments I would use, or what arguments I would recommend that a Christian use to defend their beliefs against an atheist, I mean, I really don't know, because it's not something that I've never approached it from that angle, and I'm not really good at that. I'm not really good at the debate team stuff, you know, playing devil's advocate or or being able to argue effectively for both sides. I've never been good at that. I've been able to argue somewhat effectively for my side, for the side that I think is right, for the side that I think I ought to be on. But I've never been particularly good at arguing from the other side. I've made efforts, and I think it's very important to make efforts to understand where the other side is coming from and to understand what their arguments are and why they have the position that they have. But I've never been very good at actually taking that position and arguing for it. So I really, unfortunately, don't know what to tell you. But I do know this, that this segment is over. And that means only one thing. Cue the thunderclap.
The lightning round. Rapid fire questions. Glib and adequate answers.
Ahoy year no. As for Batman v Superman, instead of making it longer, do you think you could cut it down to a decent movie? Only remove scenes, no new shots until you get an entertaining movie or short? I don't know if you could cut it down to a decent movie, but I am positive you could cut it down to a better movie. I am positive you could make an improved movie if you hacked a huge amount of material out of it. If you cut it from 2.5 hours down to under 2 hours, as long as you could maintain some level of coherence narratively, yeah, I think that would be a huge improvement. Would it be a good movie after that? Probably not. I have no idea, but it would definitely be a better movie. Lucas Hackett, one angry brony. Yo, Steve, what hurts worse? A punch to the face, a kick to the junk, or an elbow to the chest? Dusty Rhodes style. Well, I guess it would depend on how stiff Dusty was working that night. That might be the worst if Dusty was in a kind of a snug mood. But overall, I would say kick to the junk. I just would never want to experience that. I'd say that would be the worst. Joshua Purvis. Hi, Steve. I'm a big fan of your channel. Thank you, Joshua. My question is that would you do a review of the Rocky movies? Thanks. Keep it up. Yeah, I'm surprised I haven't done that yet. I'm a huge fan of the Rocky movies. I love the Rocky movies. And yeah, I'm sure I'll do that at some point. I'm not sure when. But yes, I would very much like to do a series of movie reviews about all the Rocky movies, as I've done in the past for the Star Wars movies and Star Trek and the Batman movies and the Superman movies. I would love to do that for Rocky, absolutely. I have no idea when, but I think it's going to happen eventually. Blackie Comics. Hey, Steve, I have a question. If you had to visit one Disney theme park for the rest of your life, which one would you choose and why? Probably Disneyland. Might as well be in California, right? Gary Braidwood. Hi, are you a fan of the H-Bomber guy? If not, why? I am a huge fan of H-Bomber guy. He is one of my very favorite YouTubers at the moment. I just love everything he does. I think he's a tremendously funny writer. He's a great performer. I love everything he does. I obviously I share his point of view and his perspective on the subjects that he talks about. I think he's awesome. I think he's great. He is just absolutely top-notch as far as I'm concerned. I gave him a shout-out a few weeks ago, actually. Yeah, H-Bomber guy, beautiful. Big fan, big fan. Dervunder Barbar, when Buddy Rich played The Room, he played The Room. It was amazing to see what he could do with just 2 drumsticks. For me, he's the best drummer that ever lived. Do you have a favorite drummer? And in that case, who? Boy, you know, I wanted to give a really succinct answer to this, which is why it's in the lightning round, but the more I thought about it, the more I kept thinking of awesome drummers. So at the moment, I have 3. I have, the first one that came to mind was Ginger Baker, who was the drummer for Cream. The other one is also kind of related to Eric Clapton. It is Huey Flint, who was the drummer for John Mayall and the Blues Breakers. And I thought of him because he was the drummer on the Blues Breakers with Eric Clapton album. And there's an awesome cover on that album of What I Say, where there's just this epic drum solo, like right in the middle of it, that Huey Flint does. And usually I don't like drum solos, but I like that one. It's a really awesome drum solo. So I thought of him. And then I also thought of W.S. Holland, who was the drummer for Johnny Cash and the Tennessee Three, one of the most influential drummers, maybe the most influential drummer in the history of country music. So those are mine that I would pick if I had to pick favorite drummers. Ginger Baker, W.S. Holland, and Huey Flint. So there you go. Gray Ghost Volume 1. Wow, a shout out to Gamcast. You were also featured on the Gaytheist Manifesto and was a guest on the No Religion Required podcast. Steve, I think we have very similar tastes in podcasts. Well, Grey Ghost Volume 1, you're going to love this because that was the last question. It's time for the shout-out. And the shout-out this week goes to the very same No Religion Required podcast. Holy shit, it's like I planned it or something. I was actually a guest on last week's episode of No Religion Required. If you haven't listened to it, you definitely should. It is an awesome podcast. It is hosted by the great Bobby C., along with his wife, Miss Ashley, along with the Prophet Jeremiah, along with Morgan. They have an awesome foursome of hosts. It is a great, great show. It is described as skepticism with a bit of Southern charm, and that is definitely what it is. It is a really, really fun show. I had a great time on it. It is a great show to listen to no matter what. A couple weeks ago, they had a really awesome roundtable discussion about the Orlando shooting. That featured Callie and Ari from the also aforementioned Atheist Manifesto podcast and other people as well. It was a great show, a really powerful episode, and it's just a great podcast, a great series altogether. So if you're not listening to No Religion Required, don't just take my word for it. Take Grey Ghost Volume 1's word for it as well, because clearly that's someone who knows podcasts. And yeah, I could not recommend the No Religion Required podcast highly enough. If you're not listening to it, go check it out. You will not be sorry. It's an awesome podcast. Speaking of awesome podcasts, it's like so smooth. It just goes from one to the next, like dominoes falling. Speaking of awesome podcasts, I would implore you, if you have not already, to check out the Lemme Listen podcasts. This is a series of podcasts created, for the most part, by my very good friend Jason Harding, who you should also be watching here on YouTube. He is the creative mind behind Opinionville. The podcasts under the Lemme Listen banner are Lemme Finish, which Jason co-hosts with Finite Atticus, which is just hilarious. American Monsters and How to Destroy Them, the hilarious improv comedy podcast about cryptozoology that has begun its second season. Season 2 of American Monsters and How to Destroy Them is underway right now. It also includes Cinema Shack, which is an awesome movie review podcast, and it also includes another awesome movie review podcast, more of a belated movie review podcast, which is Late Seating, co-hosted by me and Jason, one of my very favorite things that I do. I mentioned last week our most recent episode is about the 10 Commandments. You can listen to our most recent episode. You can listen to all of our past episodes. You can listen to all of the episodes, of all of the podcasts under the Lemme Listen umbrella of podcasts by going to lemmelistenpodcasts.com. And I promise you will not be sorry, because they're awesome podcasts. They will make your lives better just by sitting there and listening to them. That's all you have to do. That's all you have to do, and your life will improve immeasurably, let's just say. Anyway, that's it for me, everybody. That's it for the questions, the shout-outs, the plug for the podcast. I'm through. I'm through with everything except this. Please, 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 leave a comment on this video asking me your question for next time, because in order for me to do this, you have to ask. So leave a comment on this video asking me your question. You can ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. I will answer as many of your questions as I possibly can in the next video. And listen, you even get Kitty Cat in this episode. Can you possibly ask for more? Can you possibly ask for more? You get great questions, you get an awesome shout out, and look at this, unexpected cat. And doesn't she look so happy? She's so happy to be in Papa's video. Yes, oh my goodness. I love you. I love you. Anyway, unexpected Audie cameo. What more do you want? Leave a comment on this video. Ask me your question for next time. Ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. I'll answer as many of them as I possibly can in the next video. So until then, take care, everybody. And one more thing, right, Audie? Yeah, say we usually only do this on Tuesdays. What the hell's going on? If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And also, please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Say goodbye, Audie. Say goodbye.